Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Alright, and this is the last video. Man, I can't believe we've made it. So, where are we? Part 4, Reason and Reality. Chapter 3, Grades of Generality and the Ordering of the Problems of the Theoretic Reason. And in this last chapter, basically it's in the same vein as the two chapters prior. Husserl's kind of stepping back a little bit from the phenomenology itself and the feeling I got is like trying to place phenomenology in a broader, formal, logical, analytical framework. And so we kind of return to what we talked about. But this came up at the very beginning, actually, in the introduction, formal and regional ontology. And that's what makes up the bulk of this chapter. So we're heading back to that, just trying to situate phenomenology in this wider logical framework. It's kind of one of the reasons why I was so hesitant to read Husserl in the first place. This approach to philosophy is very much not my style. It's not, I don't know, it's not natural to me to think in these rigorous, logical, analytical, formal terms. I don't pick it up easily, and I don't have much background reading analytical philosophy. So yeah, this is one of the reasons why I think the Husserl video was such a long time in coming. But it's the last chapter. I have to do a video on it, right? I can't not do a video on the last chapter. That would just be criminal to miss that. So I've gone through it and just tried to pick up the pieces, pick up the threads, and put them into, summarize something out of what Husserl's getting at here. It's not entirely clear to me where everything fits in, how all of the pieces fit together. Phenomenology is kind of lurking in the background. Sometimes it comes to the fore more than other times in this chapter. But yeah, we'll see how we go as we work through it. So the first section I've called Formal Disciplines. Here, Husserl identifies a couple of, he doesn't call them formal disciplines, that's just the name I've given them, but he identifies a couple of methods that he uses to put things in order, to give a formal structure to his phenomenology. The first is formal logic. And this is just the pure forms of the predicative syntheses. And basically what this is objectivation through predicates. And the second, I guess it was unclear whether Husserl meant this as to be taken together or whether he intended them to be broken apart. From my reading, they come together. They belong together, these two. So I've put them together, formal axiology and praxis. And this reduces to the pure forms of the syntheses of feeling and will. So it's again, objectivation through feeling and through will. And those are the two formal categories that Husserl identifies. Like I said, that second one, whether you want to break that up, but it really didn't make too much sense to break it up because feeling and will seem to apply to both of them. And he always talks about them together, formal axiology and praxis. It's always written like that. So it made sense to me anyway to put them as a collective. But the basic idea with these formal disciplines is to reach the truth and validity of propositions concerning objectivation in general. So it's a very detached, kind of big picture overview formal, so there are no details here. We're just looking at objectivation in the broadest possible sense, in the most general sense of that word. And he notes here as well that phenomenology allows us to reach a deeper truth, or it gives us access to more of what's going on here than the worker in pure logic, because they can only approach things dogmatically through abstractions. So even though we're still at this very big picture framework kind of level, it's not abstract. There's more backing up the formal logic and the formal axiology and praxis than is available for those dealing with just pure logic. So that's the benefit that phenomenology brings to these formal disciplines. Then we look at formal ontology. Now here Husserl says that every formal logical law may be transformed into an equivalent formal ontological law. So I think here the idea is, instead of the truth and validity of propositions we were aiming at before, now we're looking at the constituents of the substantive meanings, or the facts, the constituents of the being of objects. So it's, instead of propositions and judgments, which is what formal logic and formal axiology and praxis dealt with, the focus is on meanings and objects. So still objects in general. There's still no concrete objects here, I think, but we've kind of moved down a level, not at this higher, more abstract level of propositions and judgments, and now we're looking at things like meanings and objects themselves, but still at a very general level. And that brings us to the last section, which is regional ontology. So the focus in this category is on objects within specific regions of being. And this regions of being, this also came up in the introduction, where we defined region as the highest and most inclusive generic unity belonging to a concretum, which is kind of a vague definition. And the only example he gave in the introduction was nature. So one of the core realms that go into creating an object, that go into constituting an object. One of the main ways we can consider an object, and it's, again, it's hard to define this precisely, because I don't think the definition is very precise, but some region which pertains to the constitution of an object. And again, the only example he gives, and in this case too, is material, the material region. So which is the same as the region of nature. So he doesn't, in the whole book, he doesn't talk about, that I can remember, that I spotted, he doesn't talk about any other regions. So it's still a little bit unclear what he's talking about there. Perhaps he goes into more detail in other books. But maybe another one could be the intersubjective region. Maybe that would be another region involved in the constitution of objects. He talks about intersubjectivity a little bit later, so that seems to kind of tie in. But yeah, again, like it's hard to know how many regions Husserl's imagining here, and what they could be. But material is the one that he focuses on. And the idea with this is that regional ontology gives us a guide as to how objects will be constituted in this region. So if we take our material thing, that's the name of the region that Husserl gives it, the material thing. We can investigate objects in this region through perception or even through imagination to uncover an essence of thing for this region. What is it to be a material thing? What is the essence of a material thing? And so by looking at a number of different material things, by thinking, imagining different material things, we can get a picture of what it is to be a material thing. What is the essence of such a thing? And he goes into another discussion, exactly paralleling the one that we did in the last video, regarding the inadequate givenness of transcendental objects, material things, and the limitlessness of the development of intuitions within those a priori parameters, time, space, and matter, but the way that these can all be grasped in a single idea, despite that infinity. An idea, capital I, idea, is able to adequately grasp the thing, despite the fact that it's given through an infinity of an infinity of perspectives. That's the one. I keep thinking of perception, an infinity of perspectives. And the general idea here is that it's regional ontology which reveals these a priori parameters. So regional ontology gives us these boundaries within which the thing must be constituted. And you remember we talked about the way that a material object, we don't know, we only have one perspective available to us at a time, so we don't know what's on the other sides, for example, of this object. They could be coloured, they could have writing on them, they could be a different shape or whatever. We don't know any of the details, but we do know that they will be spatial. And so it's that a priori knowledge that regional ontology gives us. So again, just situating that whole discussion from the last video into this broader framework, this broader logical framework. So we can understand the regional thing by following the infinite series of possible modifications brought together in this idea. And that leads us to the identical element, the X of the meaning, the one thing that remains the same throughout all of these different perspectives. What it is for the thing to remain or to be the same thing despite being grasped in different perspectives. And we've talked about that before, that X. That was a couple of videos back. Was it one video back? I can't remember anymore. But what this requires, Husserl says, is a change of standpoint. To get to this X, to get to this unity, this identical element, requires a change of standpoint. What he calls the different reflections, hyletic, noetic, and noematic. And so if we follow these reflections, if we investigate these reflections, this gives us insights into what Husserl calls manifolds. The regional idea of the thing, its self-identical X with the determining content of meaning, posited as being this or thus, prescribes rules for the manifolds of appearances. The law-conforming function of the correlation between the determinate appearing object as unity and the determinately infinite multiplicities of appearances can be fully seen into and so disrobed of all its mysteries. So these manifolds, they tell us not just how objects are constituted for us as human beings, but how objects must necessarily be constituted, how they are constituted in themselves, in their essence. So, and this is kind of something that I quite liked actually. A spatial thing can only be known through appearances. That's what it is to be a spatial thing. And Husserl says even God, if he existed, even God, to know a spatial thing, would have to know it through perceptions. Through perspectives, through different perspectives. That's because that's just what it is to be a spatial thing. If it could be known any other way, it wouldn't be spatial anymore. It would be immanent, right? It would be an immanent object, not a transcendent one. And obviously, manifold, there is those a priori parameters the thing must conform to in order to be the thing that it is. And this then, he says, leads to deeper, more general problems. For example, the origin of the presentation of space, also the unity of res extensa and res temporalis, extended things and temporal things, extended being and temporal being. So those are kind of directions again that Husserl is pointing out, but not going to delve into in ideas. And all of this culminates, once you follow all of this through to the end, this culminates in the perfect insight into what the idea of the real thing represents in the phenomenologically pure consciousness, how it is the absolutely necessary correlate of a structurally investigated and essentially described noetic, noematic connection, which is just the whole idea of phenomenology. It's just what it's a nice summary there actually of the kind of rigor that Husserl envisages underlying his phenomenology. He also talks in this chapter about strata a little bit more, and this has come up for us once before as well. Strata and the way that the full constituting of the thing takes place through the accumulation of different strata which constitute unities in their own right. So, for example, with the perceptual constituting of a thing, he talks about various strata being involved concerning sensation, the uppermost stratum of which is substantial causal thing, plus other strata related to the intersubjective identical thing. So what it is for the thing to be a unity available to different streams of consciousness, not just our own. And so all of these different strata, these layers, these levels kind of accumulate to make the thing, to constitute the thing as what it is. So that's kind of a nice way of thinking about it, actually. Someone mentioned this to me recently, and that kind of made me think about it a bit more, the way these different layers build up. And the important point for Husserl here is that those layers themselves constitute, in and of themselves, independent, separately, they constitute unities. So that the intersubjective identical thing is itself a unity composed of these different parts. So we can understand that, again, we're in this one, many, singular, plural kind of structure. Further, as the investigation plays out, illusions or deceptions may be uncovered. And these also must be accounted for. So Husserl is just noting here that as you're studying, as you're working through what the thing is, what constitutes the thing, you'll discover illusions or deceptions which don't go into the thing. But then these also have to be explained. These also have to be accounted for in phenomenology, how it is that these arise. And so he says, and this is kind of a nice quote, for a phenomenology of true reality, the phenomenology of vain illusion is wholly indispensable. So we need that has to be built into, it has to be a part of phenomenology, and it points the way to the true reality that phenomenology is aiming for. And obviously everything that we've said about the material thing applies to other regions as well, although he's unbelievably, frustratingly silent about what these other regions might be. He still doesn't mention them. But what he does say is that these other regions, even though they are new in type, and they deserve to be regions in and of themselves, they're ultimately grounded in material reality. So even psychical realities manifest through the physical. Hence, he says, the phenomenology of material nature holds a preeminent position. So the realm, the region, that of material thing is preeminent for Husserl. Everything ultimately is ground. All the regions ultimately take this region as their grounding point. And so, again, exactly what he has in mind with those other regions, it's not entirely clear, but they're grounded in the material. Perhaps that's the reason why Husserl focuses on it so much. And the last thing I wanted to give you here, which will see us out, is a quote which I thought just gives a nice summary of phenomenology. In principle, our task remains everywhere the same. We have to bring to knowledge the complete system of conscious formations covering all levels and strata, which constitute the primordial givenness of all such objective entities, and therewith make intelligible the equivalent, in terms of consciousness, of the relevant type of reality. And that's where I'm going to finish this. So let's run through a quick summary. First, we looked at the formal disciplines, and these were the truth of propositions concerning objectivation in general. And there were two that we pointed out, formal logic and formal axiology and praxis. The first one dealing with predicative syntheses, and the second dealing with the syntheses of feeling and will. Then we looked at formal ontology, and this was our focus on meaning and objects rather than propositions, although still concerning objects in general, so still very high level. And finally, we looked at regional ontology, which brings us to focus on objects, or the essences of objects in specific regions. And this reveals a priori parameters of the constitution of objects. So that's kind of the main purpose of regional ontology, to give us insight into these a priori parameters, which we also call manifolds. And it does this through the identical element, the X of the meaning. So that is another, it's just following through that, how regional ontology is beneficial or helpful in phenomenology. And finally, we looked at the accumulation of strata. And this was those different layers which go into the constitution of the thing, which go into objectivation of the object, the thing in specific regions. And we can use that to expand, to build on from the specific region. We can pull that back to include our findings here in formal ontology and in formal logic and formal axiology and praxis as well. And that's that. Ideas 1, Husserl, done and dusted. Thanks for watching throughout this video series. If you've stuck with me all the way to the end, was touch and go in some spots there when I was reading the chapters in preparation for these videos. Some of the times I'm reading through and I'm like, man, there's no way I can summarize this. I haven't got anything to say about. I can't pick up the thread of what he's getting at here. But somehow each video managed to miraculously, or the content seemed to appear when I sat down and forced myself to try and produce something, to write something, to summarize each chapter. Somehow it all came together in the 11th hour. But yeah, hopefully it helped you. Thanks again for watching. And I'm going to take a couple of weeks off, and then I'll start a new series, and that's going to be Watsuji Tetsuro. He's the next guy in my sights. So until then, Absurd Being out.